This is Fahamu Pecou, and this is how I create.
Welcome to This Is How We Create, a show that digs deeper into the creative life of contemporary artists of color. Discover what feeds their creativity and how they found or are finding their artistic voice. Through these intimate and candid conversations, you'll gain insights into the lives of creative professionals of color that are hard to find anywhere else. Welcome back to This Is How We Create. My name is Martine Severin, your host. You know, some people wait to be chosen, hired, or validated, but others don't wait at all. They make their own path with determination. They use different tools than most other folks use, such as guerrilla marketing, to get noticed. Dr. Fahamu Pecou is one of those people. Today on the show, you'll hear his inspiring journey from dreaming of working as an animator to becoming an award-winning artist. Dr. Pecou studied painting at college and later secured a job as a graphic designer when he graduated. This job completely changed the course of his artistic career and practice. In our talk with Dr. Pecou, he shares how hip hop influenced his work, or influences his work, I should say, and how his work came to challenge societal views of Black identity and more specifically, Black masculinity. Now, here's a little bit more about Dr. Pecou through his bio. Dr. Fahamu Pecou received his BFA at the Atlanta College of Art and a PhD from Emory University. Dr. Pecou exhibits his art worldwide in addition to lectures and speaking engagements at colleges and universities. As an educator, Dr. Pecou has developed Advantage Point, a narrative-based arts curriculum focused on Black male youth. Dr. Pecou is also the founding director of the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta, also known as ADAMA. Dr. Pecou's work is featured in noted public and private national and international collections, including Smithsonian National Museum of African American Art and Culture and Société Générale in Paris, to name just a few. Dr. Pecou was announced as one of the recipients of the 2022 Louis Comfort Tiffany Award. Just a heads up that there is adult language in this episode, so if you have sensitive ears or you have little kiddos around, just beware. You might want to pause this episode and come back to it when it's just you. Enjoy the show. Welcome, Dr. Pecou.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I'm so pleased to finally talk to you in person because for the last few weeks since I knew you were going to come over, I've had the pleasure of stalking you all over the interweb. And so the first question I have for you is in regards to your schooling. You went to college and started out as a graphic designer. Can you tell me about how exactly you decided to choose graphic design as a major?
Sure thing. So, actually, the twist is I never took a graphic design class in my life. I had zero idea or zero interest in graphic design to start out with. I actually started out in undergrad as an animation major. Growing up in South Carolina, I was always like the kid who could draw, and I knew I wanted to be an artist, but I didn't know exactly what that meant or what that looked like. I just liked to draw. And around the age of 9 or so, I learned about cartooning and cartoon animation as a career. And I had this set of encyclopedias from like 1969. And it said that a cartoonist could make up to $1,000 a week. And mind you, as a little kid telling people you wanted to be an artist, people would say things like, oh, you're going to be a starving artist, or artists never make money until they die. And when I read this thing about cartoon animators making $1,000 a week, I was like, look, here's a way I could make art. I could draw all day and I could make money. I don't have to be dead or starved to do it, right? And so I went into college fully committed to becoming an animator. And in fact, my dream at the time was to become the Black Walt Disney. I had my own characters and stories. I used to make my own comic books, etc. And so I was really, really committed to this idea of animation. But lo and behold, at Atlanta College of Art, I got introduced to the fine arts, which was a concept that I had never heard before. Growing up, I never went to galleries and museums, so I never actually saw paintings and sculptures and things like that. I knew they existed, but I'd never experienced it. And so that experience at Atlanta College of Art ended up being, really eye-opening for me. I got to meet young artists from around the world. And, of course, I knew people who were in the graphic design program. And I used to hang out with a lot of them, just playing around, doing silly stuff on the computer, messing with Photoshop, et cetera. But after I graduated from undergrad, I needed a job. There's no job for, quote unquote, a painter, which my degree was painting because I changed from animation to painting shortly after coming to school. But yeah, I graduated with a degree in painting. I needed a job. So I lied on an application and said I knew how to do graphic design. But like I said, I'd never taken a graphic design class in my life. But that also ended up being a really great experience for me. It taught me a lot, and it actually prepared me to launch into my career. My work as a graphic designer actually set me up for the creative path that I ultimately went down.
Okay, so I think I better understand now. So you had your degree in painting, you lied to get a graphic design job, and somehow became a graphic designer.
That's correct.
Can you tell me the story of what happens next? When you worked as a graphic designer, were you continuing along with painting? Were you pursuing that?
Yeah, most certainly. The entire time I was doing graphic design, I was really, Clark Kenting it, you know what I mean? Like by day, he's a mild mannered graphic designer, but at night he's slinging paint and trying to, get his work into galleries. I ended up growing increasingly frustrated with the process. Everything that they told me to do in school, or that they taught me to do in school, I was doing. I was making my work. I was writing my artist statements. I was taking slides. I was sending packages to galleries, and no one was calling me back. And I, was, like I said, was growing increasingly frustrated. And at the same time, I'm working side by side with like a who's who of late 90s hip hop artists in New York, designing flyers and posters and album covers and, all kinds of media for them. Getting a chance at being on the sort of like inside joke of marketing, and that was really, really eye opening for me. I remember sitting with one of my clients at one point and thinking about the fact that, they had this persona that was like this really tough hip hop guy, but in reality, in real life, they were one of the kindest, nicest people you ever want to meet, funny, charming, and I just thought it was really interesting. Like, what if someone marketed a visual artist the way we market hip hop artists? Would people have the same reaction to them? Would people have the same response? And so I just kind of filed that away in the back of my head, continue to do my work as a graphic designer and continue to try to like send my stuff out to galleries. But ultimately, my frustration led me to this concept that I call Fahamu Pecou is the shit. And it really started out as a joke, but I started this guerrilla marketing campaign where I took that idea that I had earlier about marketing hip hop artists. And I was like, I'm going to market myself as though I'm a hip hop artist to try to see if I can get the attention of galleries and, others. And so I started this really like grassroots guerrilla marketing campaign. I had a friend take a photo of me with like no shirt on. And I did like this graphic illustration that sort of mimics the ad campaign around 50 Cent. Because at the time, 50 Cent was like the big thing. Everybody was on 50 Cent. And I always thought it was really interesting, that, by the time 50 Cent's his first album dropped, everybody was already speaking his name because the marketing around him had been so like pervasive, right? And so I was like, I want to do something like that. I created this campaign. It didn't say what I did. It didn't show you my artwork. It just was this graphic of me with the words Fahamu Pecou is the shit, paid for by the committee to make Fahamu Pecou officially the shit. And it was really kind of like a joke. Like I wanted to see what would happen. I really wanted to just kind of test my theory to see if it would work. And it was almost like instantaneous. People were hitting me up and reacting to the posters and the stickers that I was wheat pasting all over the city of Atlanta. I started making T-shirts, with the motto on it, with the graphic, and passing it out to friends, and they would come back, be like, I had 5 or 6 people ask me where I got my shirt from today, and it just was kind of like this experiment, but also, like I said, it was a outcropping of my work as a graphic designer. I never thought about graphic design as art, but I ultimately realized that I could use this as a medium. Like I can use graphic design as a medium and ultimately use that medium to inform my paintings. And so my paintings started to be influenced by my work as a graphic designer. My early paintings were all based on magazine covers. Ended up being a really enriching experience overall.
I have a secret respect for graphic designers. I find that they tend to see the world in a way that is beneficial to whatever it is that they end up doing. Mm-hmm. So much so that when my family and I, when we lived in London, I took classes at St. Martin's in graphic design because I knew that way of seeing things would really help in being able to enhance anything that I would do as an artist in the future. Mm-hmm. But you've just dropped so much, given us so many great gold nuggets, and I just don't know where to go in terms of the next question. I guess I am very curious. Can you tell us about some of the hip hop artists you worked with back in the day?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the first projects that I ever did at the boutique agency I worked at in New York, maybe like a week before I started, Puff Daddy just opened Justin's restaurant, which was on the next block behind us. So one of my first jobs was to design some of the menus and, flyers and stuff like that for Justin's restaurant. So I got to work with Puff and his team on those kind of materials. Here in Atlanta, I did the very first album cover for Young Jeezy. I did a number of projects with a hip hop label here in Atlanta called Big Oomp Records. For years, I designed all of their collateral and materials. I did the design posters and flyers for a hip hop compilation in New York called Sound Bombing. So it was a real sort of gamut of hip hop, from the mainstream artists to underground artists. I work with brands like, the Atlanta Hawks and Coca-Cola, and, ultimately had an opportunity to work with, politicians like Shirley Franklin, who became the first mayor of Atlanta, first female mayor of Atlanta. So yeah, I worked with a lot of different people and on a lot of different cool projects.
One of the things that I notice is how people who want to be an artist versus those who talk about being an artist, those who really want to and actually execute on ensuring and doing things and have tactics that really tips everything in their favor. They do that through action. Mm-hmm. And I can only imagine the gumption to create an ad and to go around Atlanta and printing and papering walls with your name and having a tagline that says paid for by the committee. I mean, can you tell me a little bit about that work? Because I'm really interested, and I think to win as an artist, there are all of these little things that you have to do, and they all build up to ensure your success. If you could share some of the nitty-gritty details of what it actually took to do that campaign. I'm just very curious.
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked me that because the thing about it wasn't a very thought out thing. I was really just sort of experimenting. I was just having fun. The idea, the impetus for it was my frustration with, not being able to get any kind of response or feedback from the packages that I was sending out to galleries, right? And ultimately deciding that I didn't want to wait for, someone to validate me as an artist, that I could, essentially take the reins into my own hands, right? Using, marketing, using my skills as a graphic designer to kind of aid me along in that endeavor. But yeah, the one of the first things that really caught my attention, as I mentioned before, was the marketing campaign around 50 Cent, right? And so what I didn't mention before is, while I didn't have any experience or training as a graphic designer, I self-taught, by studying magazines. So when I first got that job working as a graphic designer, I would go to Tower Records and bookstores and buy like all the hip magazines, and typically they were music magazines. And so I would just kind of go through and like study the design and the composition and, colors and layouts and stuff like that. And I would, try to create my own versions of those types of designs, highly inspired by a lot of the design aesthetic of like the UK in the late 90s, early 2000s, right? Like that was a really, really big inspiration for me. But, once I came up with that concept, again, kind of patterning it off of the 50 Cent campaign, I just had a bunch of really crazy friends who were down to support me. I had worked already for many years as a promoter, so when I wasn't doing graphic design and when I wasn't doing painting in my studio, I promoted and hosted an open mic, a spoken word open mic night. So, I was always out passing out flyers and, doing all that kind of stuff. So I was like in that world already, in that kind of like guerrilla marketing, street team world. I was doing that kind of stuff already. And so it was a really sort of seamless transition to, bring this campaign to bear. I knew all the spots that I could hit. I knew where to go to Kinko's and which Kinko's to go to at 2 a.m., to get the posters printed for cheap, you know what I mean? So that I could go and wheat paste. Around that same time, Black Planet and MySpace were starting to take shape, and I started what I consider the first social media marketing campaign, particularly on Black Planet, because you could create as many accounts as you want on Black Planet. And so I would make fictitious accounts where I would, promote, oh man, did you see that Fahamu Pecou, thing, and like pass it along and like try to get it, get people to like respond and react to things I was posting online. One of the things that I used to do as a part of the campaign was find like pictures of people that were super whack, right? And I would do like a compare and contrast. So I'd do like the whack photo of somebody and it would say not the shit. And then it would be my image, and it would say Fahamu Pecou is the shit, accept no imitations, paid for by the committee,
goodness.
So I was doing all kinds of like, experimental things like that, just to kind of see if I could get a reaction, just to see what the response would be. And I didn't have a goal in mind. I just was doing it and just wanting to make sure that this was the thing that was kind of like my driving motivation. I was like, well, maybe the galleries aren't calling me back because they can't pronounce my name. So I'm going to put it out there as much as possible. So it's so saturated, that when they see something come across their desk, they'll say, oh, I've seen this name before. This is that guy. Let me take a look at it. Right. And so that was really my sort of goal with the street campaign, but it just evolved into so much more.
That's so interesting because it's so true when people say, start with where you are, because in this case you had experience in marketing, in guerrilla marketing, and you just use that to your advantage. And I reckon that might be really great for someone else. I mean, not the specific guerrilla marketing, but when you have an expertise elsewhere, you can really tailor it towards what you want to do. So that's really great. So tell me about some of the results from that. Did people start calling you and knocking down your door, or was it just like, or was it just you just got a few bits of interest from that campaign?
And I got a lot of interest. It ended up being like national and international, even long before I left Atlanta, long before I set foot out of Atlanta to do anything. People became familiar with the brand. I had friends who lived in other cities who, again, like would wear the shirts, and then people would be interested, and then they would go and look it up. And, everybody thought that the catchphrase, is the shit, was like a, really catchy and fun and provocative thing, so it just caught people's attention. Maybe around 2002, because I started this campaign in 2000. So around 2002, still doing my thing, researching and studying magazines. I got a subscription card in one of the magazines that I found, and it had an image of a person on the cover of this forthcoming issue that I didn't recognize, and it sparked another question in my head. It was like, when you see somebody on the cover of a magazine, you automatically think they're somebody important. They're on the cover of a magazine, even if you've never heard of them before. So I was like, I should be on the cover of a magazine. And so I made up a magazine called Contemporaneo, and I designed a subscription card, for this fake magazine. And it said, if you fill it out and you mail it back in, you'll get a free issue of Contemporaneo featuring Fahamu Pecou. And then I went back to bookstores all over the city, and I just put these cards that I made in all the magazines, because I wanted to see, again, what would happen if people would think it was real, if people would actually react to it. And these cards came back by the hundreds, like people, mailing them in, requesting this issue of this fake magazine that doesn't exist. And, it just really began to demonstrate to me the effectiveness, the power of marketing, right? The power of media to direct and oftentimes to instill, our sense of value and culture and society. Like, we often think of those things as being something that comes from inside of us, but no, that stuff is informed and influenced by things that go on outside of us, and we take the parts that resonate with us the most, right? And I just found that to be a really interesting, and later on down the line, as I started getting more into like my academic work and stuff like that, and understanding psychology and the great deal of psychology that's embedded in marketing and advertising and media, it just really let me understand even deeper the impact of this kind of expression.
You have such good ideas. So you say that you were very much influenced by the movie Menace to Society, and it went on. And I think from what I remember, you said that influenced you even before you went to college. Can you talk to me about that story and how that influences what you do even to today?
Menace came out the summer that I graduated high school, right? So right between me graduating high school and me leaving to go to college. Like everybody my age, at that time, it was the movie that you wanted to go see, like it was the movie for the hip hop generation of that summer. So I was super excited to see it. But what I was unprepared for was the visceral reaction that I had to watching the film. I literally walked out of the theater that day thinking I'm going to die. And it wasn't, I realized, more now, as an adult, that it wasn't just that film did that to me, but it was the compiling of images of Black male bodies in various states of destruction, right? The imposition of Black male bodies dying, right? Like violence of gangs, drive-by shootings. I have friends in high school who, were killed because of getting jumped in a fight or, being shot over a girl, like things like that. Witnessing this stuff real time, but I'm also, coming out of growing up in an environment where you're constantly being told that as a Black man, your options are very limited, that you're more likely to end up in prison and in college, and that, you're more likely to, have a child out of wedlock that forces you into, some sort of labor or job that is not really your dream or passion, but you just got to pay the bills at this point, right? So it's like all of these layers of death-bound subjectivity that I'm that I've grown up in and around, and Menace was just sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was interesting on a number of levels for me because there were a lot of parallels between, or parallels I saw between the main character Cain and myself in terms of him having lost both of his parents violently at an early age, being raised by older relatives in the projects, like that was my story as well. The difference was I wasn't into any kind of gang activity or any, like I wasn't that kind of kid, you know what I mean? But just the idea that Cain was preparing to leave LA and start a new life in Atlanta, and I was preparing to leave this town, these projects, and move to Atlanta, you know what I mean? To watch him die, it just made me feel like, wow, what's the point? Like, I'm going to die anyway, you know what I mean? Like, there's no real reason to try at this stage, and so I kind of carried that sentiment with me unconsciously for a number of years after. Like, I would mark accomplishments or, mark my birthdays by celebrating things that the tragedies I avoided, right? So 19, I ain't been shot yet. 20, I ain't never been arrested. You know what I mean? And I like literally went through that almost every year until I was about 28 years old. Just anticipating my demise, right? Like all of the negative language, the negative media, the negative portrayals, or the absence or exclusion of options for my black male body made me anticipate my demise. And so ultimately, that's where my work lives today. I'm trying to counter the images and the pervasive narrative of black male destruction, from external as well as internal forces. I'm trying to complicate images of black masculinity by depicting us, in a number of infinite number of ways, right? That we can be so many things that, I was talking to a friend of mine the other day about the fact that when I was maybe 8 or 9 years old, I remember having a thought, certainly like, or perhaps maybe even depressed at my lot in life, right? As a little boy, but thinking just because it is this way doesn't mean it has to be this way, right? Like just because something is doesn't mean it has to be. And, trying to inject that same sentiment through my work by showing us again in as many ways as possible, by confronting the stereotypes and literally in some cases getting inside of them as a way of exploding them inside out, by celebrating the aspects of our existence, our performance, our comportment that is often highly criticized, like, sagging pants and stuff like that. People just write off young men who are doing that. But it's like, you need that space of rebellion. You need that space of edge to kind of begin to define yourself against, what society tells you are, right? So there's all of these different really like complex ideas about black masculinity that I'm attempting to engage that allows us as black men, but also those of us who are not black men, to see ourselves more broadly and more humanely.
Thank you. I think all of that and the work that you've been doing, it certainly comes through to your work. I know that I remember hearing about your installation, You Can't Cop Cars. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that relates to your practice of redefining what Black masculinity looks like?
Yeah, for sure. Again, I think there's so much emphasis on black subjectivity in various states of trauma that I wanted to, my interest in my work more and more lately has been an attempt to sort of distance ourselves, or what's the word I'm looking for? Disassociate from the ideas of blackness that are tied to white supremacy, right? So rather than thinking about, the trials and things that we have to go through through the lens of trauma, I try to seek the beauty in it. Like what are the moments worth preserving, right? In these spaces. And so We Can't Cop Cars Without Seeing Cop Cars came out of this idea of mobility and agency in Black male youth culture. For many young Black men, your first taste of like true freedom and liberation is when you get that car, when you get that whip, and you can, start to move around and go where you want to go. And I've always been really intrigued and also moved by the irony of the fact that, a lot of times, especially here in the South, when, young men get their first car, they don't go to a lot or a dealership, they go to an auction, or they go to somebody, around the way, and you might find like decommissioned police cruisers, and so you see these young men driving, like you're driving down the street and you look in your rearview mirror, you see the silhouette of a police car, and then it passes you, and it's just like some young dudes, joyriding, and I always thought that was really ironic that a popular vehicle amongst young Black men is this, particular silhouette, this Crown Victoria police cruiser, you know what I mean? Like that has symbolized so much trauma, but gets transformed into something, that gives you like freedom, like something that once represented, your detention, that once represented your restraint, now becomes a thing that gives you wings, right? And so We Can't Cop Cars is about giving, it's a film and installation where you see a young man fantasizing, daydreaming about being able to be in a car just riding freely, but reality brings you back and you see that he's really, just laying in a junkyard, daydreaming about the day that he can have that kind of mobility, that kind of freedom. The title of the piece comes from a lyric by Kanye West. It says, "We can't cop cars without seeing cop cars." And so it's really, about that irony of, agency and mobility, and there's sometimes in the ways we sometimes restrict our own vision of what we can be and what we can do.
I feel like we could have spent the whole conversation just on that installation and talking about it more deeply, but there's time is one of those things. I'd love to wrap up our conversation by asking you this one question. Mm-hmm. I know that Hebrew Brentley mentions that you have made a profound influence on his life, and I'd love for you to think about who in your life has made a profound influence in terms of being a mentor or a benefactor of you, your creative work, and your intellectual well-being.
Yeah, man, it's a laundry list of folks. But I'll start out by saying, one, have to reflect that same sentiment and energy about my brother. Like Hebrew has been a huge inspiration to me. We used to share a studio in Atlanta back in the day. He's one of my best friends, and we always used to kind of collaborate and work on pieces together. But I always credit Hebrew with demonstrating for me the beauty of, like, really demonstrating for me the beauty of painting, right? Like, while I studied painting, like, I understood it more in terms of, like, the formal aspects of it. I was very, almost scientific, in my approach to painting. But spending time watching Hebrew paint and watching his courage, watching his freedom, like, he is the kind of artist, he'll start out with something and then by the end of the day it's something completely different. Like he just keeps working into it until it becomes what he wants it to be, right? And I always thought that was really, really beautiful. Like it was a really mesmerizing thing to watch. I think sometimes as artists we're afraid to relinquish control, and Hebrew is the exact opposite. And I always appreciated that about him. I also got to give a big shout out to my mentor, Dr. Arturo Lindsay. He was my first painting professor. But he was also the first artist that I ever met who actually was in real time living the idea of what an artist can be that I had in my mind. Like he was the first person that I could like literally reach out and touch that was an artist, that was accomplished. Like you go to his house and he's listening to jazz music and he's traveled the world and he's written books and he's a professor, and just, really genuine spirit. There was also the connection we had in that Arturo is from Panama, from the same place that my father was born in Panama. They both immigrated to the United States around the same age, and so we shared that connection as well. But yeah, Arturo continues to be my great mentor to this day. He's like become like a dad to me. And like everything that I have become has really been from walking in Arturo's footsteps, including, my pursuit of the PhD. I never heard of that before I met Arturo. He modeled for me the kind of life and career that I aspired to. And then finally, I have to give a shout out to Karen Marie Mason. Karen, unfortunately, passed away last year, but for 20 plus years before that, Karen was my business manager, confidant, my coach. She guided me in terms of the business side. She always, even when I was doing Fahamu Pecou as a shit, and I was, it was a joke to me. She was always very much like, what you're doing is, like she would put it into a context that allowed me to see that there was more to that story than the jokey part of it, right? Like there was something serious and compelling in the stories that I was attempting to tell. And so I always appreciated that about her. But, even more than that, just the way that she loved on and continues to love on me and propel me forward, because I can be somewhat shy and reserved. And she would always pull me out and say, yo, Pecou, big up yourself. And so, we try to do that all the time.
Thank you so much. I mean, thank you for being so generous with your time and for dropping so much knowledge. I know that I've walked away with some really great ways in terms of rethinking what I do, and I'm hoping that the listeners have found the same. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Pecou.
It's my pleasure.